everyone. Welcome to the very first MilSpouse Transition live stream. I'm so excited to invite you here to enjoy this conversation. So, loneliness is a health and wellness concern for our nation, but military families are especially prone to the effects of isolation. Our military lifestyle just makes, with the frequent moves to new communities, makes it more difficult to make deep connections and build those support networks of family and friends. The impact of loneliness is so detrimental that it has been estimated to shorten a lifespan by 15 years, in addition to a whole host of other medical issues, depression, high blood pressure, diabetes. All of these things have been shown to be caused or affected by loneliness. Now, transition out of active duty life comes with its very own special dose of loneliness. Not only are you moving once again, or even if you're staying placed, but everybody else will be moving it once again, you may be asking yourself, am I even part of this community still? Do I have a place to belong? Do I actually have a home and the support network? So what do we do about that? That's what today's conversation is going to be about. Welcome to MilSpouse Transition live stream. It's sponsored by SpouseLink, a community to support, inform, and inspire military spouses. And I am Anna Larson, a military spouse transition expert and your host for today. So I'm very excited to be here with my guest, Richelle. I am going to pull up Richelle's bio so you can all get to know who she is, because she is amazing. All right, let me pull this up right here. So Richelle is a licensed clinical social worker working in the mental health field for over 20 years, with extensive experience working with diverse and highly vulnerable populations. She is passionate about helping individuals identify and reduce stress and recover from trauma. In 2012, Richelle started working with her own private practice, primarily serving highly suicidal individuals suffering with difficulties regulating their emotions and maintaining relationships. As a Marine Corps veteran and special operations spouse, Richelle saw a need for the therapeutic methods she used within her community to help serve the active duty and veteran population to combat the high rate of suicide. Richelle founded Her Ruck, which specializes in supporting military-connected women to reduce their emotional load. So I'm going to pull that down, and I'm going to bring Richelle up. Hi, Richelle.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. I know my bio sounds like a big mouthful, so I don't know if people really understand from that, but yeah.
I don't think it's a mouthful at all. I think what it shows is that you have a lot of experience with people who have experienced trauma that may be feeling, I'm going to say, not at their best, right? And that's where loneliness comes in. That is a moment where you feel so disconnected from other people. And I know you've worked a lot with suicidal populations, and that is a real threat when you have that loneliness factor.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot in my private practice, a lot of the clientele struggle with how do you build and maintain relationships if they feel awkward or they don't know what to say because anxiety, right, gets in the way and all these things kind of interfere with that. But I think that key word when we talk about loneliness is belonging. And that's the big struggle with transitioning, especially is, like you said, do I belong? Do I belong anymore?
Yeah. And it's one of those questions that I think people, when they're going through that transition process, they're so busy, right? They're so busy that they don't necessarily always stop to think about it. And so that feeling hits after you walk out. Like, I know for me, it happened the day my spouse went to get his DD 214, right? Like the last day where I was like, wait, I'm not ready. No, stop, hold on. We're not ready for this yet. Can we just give me another week, right? Like it was like that fear of I'm losing everything. I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not prepared for it yet, right?
Well, and sometimes you do lose a lot, right? Some of those like team or like unit groups that you're in, that you're seeing invites in, now you can get kicked out of those, right? Some organizations think these are for our active duty spouses and you're like, that's not you anymore. Sorry. And so that connection, it is lost. So that's really tough.
And even more than that, this is funny that you say that because I had a conversation just yesterday with a spouse that's been out 6 months. And we were talking about how even the benefits that they do provide transitioning military spouses, they're like, hey, for the next year, you get to do this, right? I'm like a year out, I was still barely keeping my head above water trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Like I didn't have the time or energy or bandwidth to try and like utilize these great, fantastic resources where people are like, for the next year, you get this. And I was like, no. So
yeah. It goes back to Maslow's hierarchy, right? I'm sorry, if we're still worrying about our finances and our housing, where we're going to live at the bottom rung of making sure that our family is fed, I don't know that I can get to that accusation, like, all this stuff in the topper rung. Nor will I be there in a year, or it's not going to be top of my thought process or what I can do. So that kind of does miss the mark a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's just something we don't think about. We think, oh, it's going to be like every other PCS. I'll weather it. I'll get through it. And then it goes, right? And sometimes that's just not the way it works. It's not just like every other PCS. It's not like just every other transition you've gone through. And I think sometimes it hits people deeper. But let's jump into our questions that I have for you today, because I think this is going to really help some of those military spouses that are out there that are feeling kind of that loneliness factor. So the first question I came up with for you today is, what is the difference between normal alone time or being alone and unhealthy loneliness?
Yeah, I love this question because a lot of times the people that I work with, they can't handle even normal alone time. Like, it's that aloneness, that silence kicks in. They start ruminating or worry thoughts, and all those things are happening. So that's unhealthy alone time. That's not, I'm connecting with myself. I'm connecting with my higher power. I'm enjoying kind of like boosting myself and building mastery for something in myself, all those things. Like, we want that alone time. That silence is so good for us. It activates our imagination, our creativity. It gets where we get to focus on us.
Yeah.
But it's really dangerous and problematic when it's so uncomfortable, and you really get kind of, it's like a wave of emotions. I don't belong. I don't fit in. No one sees me. No one cares. I'm by myself. All those things that we see with that we encompass in the word loneliness, right? I'm alone. I'm by myself, and that's where it's really problematic. And it's really hard for somebody who's dealing with anxiety and depression and not having that treated, to be able to just snap themselves out of it and go, oh, well, here's all these steps that I read in this blog of what I should be doing because I'm feeling loneliness, right? You're like, okay, there's other things at play.
Yeah.
But the first thing I would say is really that I like to call it, have a mirror conversation with yourself, right? It is really reflecting back to yourself am I effective and healthy when I have moments of silence or I'm alone? Or am I overwhelmed with emotions that are uncomfortable and it's really hard to sit with? And I'm finding myself filling it with distractions, filling it with like emotional pain.
That is such a good question. I mean, that question right there, that really is what tells the difference between healthy alone and unhealthy alone. What you just asked. I love that. We're going to have to write a blog on that. I'm just telling you right now. Like, it's going to have to go out there. We're going to have to be like, this is the question you need to ask yourself. Okay, so if you are having those feelings, then what's next, right? Like, if you do recognize this is unhealthy alone time for yourself, what are you doing? What's the next step?
Right. And a little bit of it is the Marine in me, right? It's like personal responsibility. You have to do something. You have that conversation with yourself. You recognize it. You're aware of it. It's up to you to reach out and do something, right? You may be able to, even reaching out to your spouse or reaching out to a loved one or a trusted, supportive person, that's you taking action. And so I'm all down for that. Even if you're just telling one person and saying, help me, that's great. But if you can reach out to the resources that we know that we have through our insurance, things like that, and exploring with a mental health professional, and understanding the difference between, is this something I need to explore through therapeutic talk, like cognitive behavioral therapy or things like that? Or is this something that's going to require long-term medication or short-term medication? Because like, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but I can't provide meds. And so if you're coming to me and you're thinking, I really need some anxiety or depression medication, I have social anxiety that's really strong, I can't show up to things, I can talk you through that. I can give you some tips. I can teach you mindfulness. There's some strategies we can do, but I can't write you a prescription. And so now you have a secondary appointment and a secondary call you have to go through, which
Yeah.
that could be very overwhelming for a person. And so really understanding, do I need to see a psychiatrist or an ARNP that works with psychiatric medications? Do I need a psychologist? Do I need a mental health counselor? And oftentimes it's both. It's a
Yeah.
med provider and a counselor. And so knowing that difference.
Yeah. So this kind of loneliness that we're talking about, I think that a military spouse absolutely can feel this when they're going through transition. I also know that this is also something that service members, as they're transitioning out, probably also experience to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are that family member that's seeing this happen and recognizing that this what I'm going to call unhealthy loneliness is part of this person's life, what would you suggest to them to do or say, or what's an action that they could take where they could help start that process of recognizing and moving forward? I know it's up to them to actually do the steps, right? But
Right.
what can you do as like the support person?
So I always go back to kind of an earlier step in that, right? And it's know your relationship. And so I never want to give advice for a spouse to reach out to their partner if they might be unsafe in doing so. And so we don't want to be like confrontational in a way that could increase like their symptoms. It could isolate them and pull them away further. It could, bring to like verbal or physical altercations. And so sometimes as that spouse who's recognizing it, going to therapy to say, I'm recognizing there's a problem, and having that professional understand the dynamic of your relationship. Because what I might say to one spouse is different than what I might say to another. If their spouse is receptive and they've had lots of conversations, they've had financial difficulties and they're able to sit down and have frank, honest conversations, and the spouse is receptive, that's one conversation. If their spouse is never receptive to them, but are they receptive to, somebody of the same gender or somebody that they respect or a mentor in their field or a family member, I would want to explore all of that. And so really knowing the dynamic of the relationship is important. And I would say, I think that for the most part, spouses probably know where they fit into that.
Yeah.
And so if you know that you feel safe saying, hey, sweetheart, I noticed that, you used to do this when you were still active duty, and this is kind of how we'd spend our weekends, but now we're not doing that. And we're binging Netflix shows, or you're spending a lot of times on video games, or you're not making phone calls. I don't see you talking to your friends as much anymore. And I'm just concerned, and I wanted to approach the conversation. How are you feeling, or what is your experience? Are you noticing this too? Sometimes that's a good feeler to see, is this a safe conversation? Do you feel safe talking about it?
Yeah. Oh, that's such good advice. See, here I jump right into be the therapist, right? And I'm totally not qualified.
Well, and a lot of times our spouse they don't want to hear, like, my husband's really great at working out, but I don't want him to be my personal trainer, even though he's really great at it. It's like, it can't come from me.
Right. I'm like, don't tell me how to do that. I got this. That's so true. That is so true. That's funny. Okay. All right. So if we're moving past like having that conversation, let's talk for just a minute. Let me throw in the idea of social anxieties and fears, right? So I know, especially since COVID, this has been kind of a heightened conversation, I'm going to say. So if you are having those social anxieties or those fears of like peopling, I'm going to call it peopling, right? That hinder your social interactions. How can you manage those as a military spouse, especially a military spouse now going through this process of leaving everything behind, leaving people behind, leaving an identity and a lifestyle behind, right? And now having to create something brand new.
What's fascinating about this is that I really want to jump into the clinical side, right? I'm natural urge to jump into the clinical side, like you just said. I don't want to make a blanket response for all spouses on that either.
Yeah.
And so awareness of symptoms, like, what does that look like? First step would be, is this something that I can manage? Is this something that I can create a plan for? And so one of the things that I know that works well for anxiety is having clear expectations. Knowing what you're getting into, right? So for a spouse who is trying to show up to a gym for the first time or show up to an event for the first time, but they've never been to the event space, they don't know parking. Well, that's an anxiety. That's going to trigger, that's going to compound the anxiety they're experiencing. They don't know anybody that's going to be there. That's going to compound the issue. And so there's steps that they can do in between. For me, when I'm anxious about something, I like to volunteer at an event before I like participating in an event,
Mm,
because I feel like it's a safer way to get in. I have purpose, I have things to do. So that might be a good thing for me to do. Driving to the event space ahead of time, that's a good strategy that you can do. Reaching out to another person and bringing them along, or asking who else is going to be there, maybe having coffee with that individual ahead of time so you have a familiar face in there. There's a lot of different steps and strategies that you can take in place, but really analyzing, how big of a problem is this for me? Is this something that I can create a strategy and I can do on my own? Or is
yeah.
this something that's so overwhelming, I'm noticing it in other areas of my life as well? And do I need professional support for that? Do I need some sort of emotion regulation training in order to get there first?
Yeah, two things that I want to address what you said. First of all, I just want to make sure that we reiterate that this conversation, any of this conversation is not going to be a blanket. Everybody should do this, right? Let's make sure we put that out there, because I think that this really is about like analyzing, being very self-aware. Loneliness, this topic is a self-awareness topic where it's going to be an individualized approach to everyone. That's the first thing. And the second thing is what you were just talking about. I had a recent conversation with Jen Pilcher, who is the founder of MilSpouse Fest. And she was this, if you're not aware of what that is, this is like a big, like, it's a military spouse day. Everybody comes to the event, and there's like 100, people there, males and females, all the military spouses getting together, and it's a big party. And what she said to me, which was really, really interesting, is she said, most of those military spouses are showing up alone, terrified to be there, but they're they're taking this massive step out and putting themselves out there. And she's like, and everybody else thinks they're all coming with their besties or this big group, or, and they think in their head, I'm going to be all by myself. And the reality is, in the military world, most of the time we are showing up alone to these events. And so I just want to throw that out there to anyone that's listening right now, right? Like that you're not the only person that's showing up alone. Most of us actually are doing that naturally. So
Yeah. And that's great for like events or people that are listening who are hosting events. Even if you're hosting events outside of the military, like that's something that everybody suffers with, is the showing up alone feeling, right? And
yes.
so that's why those, as much as people will make fun of icebreakers or getting to know you things or activities, or, put you into small groups, that's why those things happen, is because it gives you those periods and those moments to connect.
Yeah, you said two other things when we were talking about this that I just want to touch on. They actually were kind of part and parcel of like the last couple of questions I had for you. But one thing you said was having realistic expectations about what is going to be happening. So you were talking about how do you set those realistic expectations for yourself? Like, when it comes to avoiding disappointment, maybe in like relationships, like you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to go here and I'm going to make a good friend and it's going to be this, and then it doesn't happen. And it just compounds that feeling of, nope, I don't have a place. Right.
Right. Yeah. And in my workshop, I talk about cognitive distortions or thinking traps that we get into. And one of those is, if I had a bad experience this one time, they're all going to be bad experiences in the future, which isn't true, right? So you can go to an event and you can not connect really deeply or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you can't participate fully, right? You can still jump in and answer questions and participate and leave and go, okay, well, I got through that, right? You're building skills by doing that. You're decreasing the amount that your emotion peaks every time that you, instead of letting it peak and then you don't fill it with something, it's going to peak higher the next time. And so when you start blocking that intense anxiety that you're experiencing with, I'm going to do something about it, it's going to come down immediately because you're in action, you're in participation. And
Mm.
I think that that's really important to do. Just so many different people also have unspoken expectations on the other person. And so, I know throughout my military spouse career, I guess, if you could call it a career,
It is a career.
it is a career,
Own
right?
it. Own
Own
that
it.
career.
I always thought, like, I know I'm in the thick of it. I know this is really heavy for me. And so the last person I want to do is add something to another military spouse, which is who we often connect with based on duty station, relationships, how things come about. But every single time that anybody has ever reached out to me, I have felt grateful, and in that contribution to them has been a benefit to me. It's been building resiliency in me. Like it's adding to my like my tool belt and things like that. And
Yes.
so reminding ourselves that um, one, don't block somebody from assisting you or supporting you or helping you, because they are getting something from that also, and they probably need it, and you're modeling for them that you can ask for help. So there's so many things at play, but don't have expectations that you haven't communicated. And so if you're texting a friend and they never text back, just say, I want to make sure, because I feel like I'm texting you and you're not, I noticed that I'm not getting the responses. Are you overwhelmed? Is my texting, interfering with your life? Am I causing problems to you? And they'll probably like, oh my gosh, no. I will say that I see it and I set it down and I'm so busy that I haven't even gotten back to it, and then it's buried. Don't personalize that. That means that person is in the thick of it, right? That doesn't mean that
Yeah.
when you do get face to face time with them, that it isn't great. And so take all of the experiences with that individual before you personalize that one thing, whether
Oh,
they didn't call you back.
I love that. I love that, right? All of the experiences, not just the one single thing that made you feel like I've overdone it, or I've ruined this, or something along those lines. That is so good. That is so good. Okay, so the last little piece I wanted to touch on is, you had talked about sometimes when you go to an event or go somewhere, you like to volunteer. Having a purpose, basically, is what I'm talking about. So how does having a purpose help you build these stronger relationships, or I'm going to say, help you not feel lonely?
Well, purpose, for military families, right, comes a lot with the military culture, right? And so when you leave that, and, when the service member leaves and they lose that purpose of belonging to this greater mission,
Yeah.
um, I think finding a new purpose means also finding a new community sometimes. And that could be different, right? Your community could still be veteran, it could still be military connected community, but it's
Mhm.
just a little bit different. Like, how are you contributing? How are you adding to building mastery for yourself, which is a self-respect, right? It's a self-respect skill. The more the more you increase how you feel about yourself, the loneliness decreases. It's okay to be alone when you really when you really love yourself, when you really are proud of yourself, when you really have something that makes you feel competent, in control, willing to take charge. All those things really come into play in who you are and your ability to stand alone in different areas of your life. But you have to have a purpose. You have to find something that's greater than you, that you can give value to and that you can connect with.
Yeah. And in that sense, often that comes then with other people who have a similar or the same purpose. And that makes kind of almost like a natural connection, right? Like a natural melding of like-minded people that enjoy the same thing or feel the same way about something. And it builds like an almost like an automatic community. I mean, that's kind of what the military is, right? Like,
Mhm.
when you think about it, our military community, we all connect. We may be very, very different about
Mhm.
all the other places, but guess what? We're all part of the military. Therefore, we're all in the same group. We all get it.
Right. Like, I get you, me too, all that, that instant connection. And then it's a step further because you're spending time with people, right? Like loneliness is one thing, but social isolation is another thing. And so, how are you getting out in front of these people? How are you spending time with them so you get a deeper connection to them as a person, as a whole person, versus just that we have this in common?
Yeah. How does self-worth play into all of that? Like having that purpose. Like if you're not feeling good about yourself, right? And then you're like, I need to find my purpose and get out there and meet people, like, but you're just not feeling it. Like, what are some steps that people can take where they can start to maneuver through those feelings of, I guess, maybe like fear, or I don't feel worthy, or I'm not going to be good enough, right? And actually, and to put themselves out there.
So, like, I'm a pretty confident person. I'm probably confident even when I shouldn't be confident, just because that's just the nature of, like, I think my character and how I've developed. So I often find clients for some reason who are on the opposite side of the spectrum. And so I love working with people who don't feel the most confident, because a lot of times what they need is permission to just feel what they feel and to be who they are. But a lot of that requires self exploration. And so what do you care about? I often ask people, what would actually make you show up with a picket sign in front of a building? Like, what is that topic that's going to make you respond on a Facebook comment where you normally wouldn't on a Facebook post? That's probably something that you feel really strongly about, right? That's something that at your core is a value, like it's pushing on a value that you have. So there's value exercises that you can do. The military, in the military community, there's so many, especially for spouses, it's always like getting to know you with like these specific, like the anagrams, the strengths finders, all these different things. But they all add valuable information into who we are, how we operate. And when you think about it, it is self-exploration to take those things. I think that's why they continue to be offered, is because it brings value to who you are. And so leaning into who that is and being assured that it's okay, and giving yourself permission. And if you need permission, just call me and I'll give you permission. It's fine. Like I will, you can borrow any of my confidence anytime.
I love it.
Yeah.
This is coming from the career military spouse, okay? She's ready to support you in whatever way that need is. I love that so much. Okay, I have just one more question. I know I have gone so far off script. Richelle is fantastic because I had like this nice little like, here's what we're going to talk about, and we are all over the place. But I love that because I feel like this is the way the conversation flows, right? This is the way it happens, because I know that in my life I have felt that kind of loneliness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am I'm going to call myself a fairly gregarious person. I also have a lot of confidence, maybe when I shouldn't necessarily have that confidence, right? And I don't mind throwing myself into the middle of things and being like, here I am, take me or leave me, kind of a little bit, right? But I know that that's not everyone's style. And, but even being that kind of person, I have felt this kind of loneliness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have felt disconnected and unsure of my space and uncomfortable and all of those things that go along with this. And so my last question for you, and I promise this is the last one. We're going to be closing out because we're almost to 30 minutes right now. But this is a question I got asked the other day by a military spouse getting ready to transition. And she asked me, what do friendships look like outside the military community? And I thought that was such an interesting question, because I'm like, don't you have friends that aren't military? And she's like, yeah, but I'm still in the military. And so it was like this big, like I almost feel like it came down to identity, understanding identity and who you are more than the actual friendships. But what would you say to a person that asked you this question, Richelle?
Well, I think reminding them that the military is a culture, right? And I think you and I have talked about this before, like this varies acculturation model when it comes to transitioning in and transitioning out of the military. The idea that you wouldn't ask a person like, well, I don't know, maybe you would, but from another country, they came into America, like if they said, what's it like to make friends in America? What's it like to make friends here? You might have a clearer picture to go, oh, okay, so friendships here is usually like we have a culture that surrounds around like sharing food, like going out to eat, maybe playing games together. It's shared experiences together. And so I think that it's very appropriate to say the same thing for people who are transitioning out of the military into the civilian world, to say, you don't lose your culture. You don't lose that you were a military spouse just because you're no longer active duty, right? You are still a military spouse. That culture that you've experienced for the last 20 years, 14 years, 8 years, whatever that is, still carries forward with you. And you get to bring a piece of that, of you, into those friendships, into that relationship. And I think that that friendship will be more rich and more diverse if you do bring that in, versus saying, I have to set this aside now.
Yes. And you know what? I'm just going to throw this out there, but this goes for your military children as well, right? Like when you're getting ready to leave that active duty life and now they're making friends outside of that space, friends that are going to be around for a long term. I know that can be kind of like almost terrifying sometimes for them. So I love that. Thank you so much, Richelle. I love this conversation. I could probably keep talking with you for like another full hour. That's not the plan right now. But I really, really, really appreciate like what you brought to the table today and the thought processes that you shared with us today. I think one of the best takeaways for me specifically was being more self-aware of the value that I can bring to friendships or to relationships, and knowing that that loneliness is, if you're feeling that loneliness, to be able to take that first step and say, I need help. Other people are going to be there to help you recognize what your value is in that space.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And I
That's
hope that
what-
everybody keeps the conversation going in the comments, right? Because if they're listening to this on a replay and they have thoughts, like, don't undersell your thoughts or your value or your input, because there's something in you that needs to be shared with other people. That's a gift.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay. Yes. Keep the conversation going in the comments. I mean, in addition to that, if you haven't seen it, I just dropped on my LinkedIn page. There's a wait list going up for this vision planner that I have for transitioning spouses, where it's all just kind of about reminding yourself of the big picture. We're reminding yourself of what you want out of this transition. And then I also stuck in there 10 questions to ask yourself when you're like truly hating life, like to help you get out of that unstuck feeling of like, this is the suck that I do not want to embrace, right? Because you know, we all say that at some point. And I promise you, you will feel that at some point. Richelle, especially you who are looking like transition is looming right there for you. So I'm excited for you and your family, and I hope that it's going well.
So far, so good.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's pull up the banner really quick and tell people where to find you if they want to talk with you further about this, or reach out for some of your counseling services or your courses or your workshops, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is just connect with me on LinkedIn. If you don't have LinkedIn, you can email me at my first and last name at gmail.com, Richelle Futch at gmail.com. But I'm really wanting to grow my LinkedIn. So connect with me there. And, you know, I'm always available to do workshops. I do a lot of speeches to mental health professionals and corporations on military culture. So if that's something that you need to bring into your organization, let me know. I'm happy to have conversations, or at least help guide you in how to start those conversations.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to slide right to the next slide really quick before I say goodbye to my guests. So our next live is going to be on VA loans, buying, building, or renovating, and using that VA loan to do any of those three things during transition. So I've got an expert on VA loans that's going to be joining me. We're going to talk about the ins and outs of what this looks like. This is like not anything to do with loneliness, but it's still another conversation we get a lot of questions about. I want to thank our sponsor, SpouseLink. As a transitioning MilSpouse, you probably have more questions than answers, and that's why AFMA created SpouseLink, to support, inform, and inspire military spouses like you around the world with the resources you need to lead your family back to civilian life. So check it out at spouselink.org and say thank you to them for this. Head over to milspouse-transition.com and check out the fastest growing transition resource hub for military spouses and families. And come find me on LinkedIn. Find us both. Richelle and I want you to come connect with us if we're not already connected, and hit my bell to get the latest in opportunities for the world. So Richelle, I just want to jump right back in. Let me pull this down and say thank you so much for being an amazing guest today. I look forward to having you on again, because I know our conversations are always so great, and they're topics that people don't talk about enough. If I'm just going to say that, they're topics people don't talk about enough. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I think we're going to go ahead and say goodbye. Are you ready?
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye everyone. Thank you.